Hey, I'm Bob at ILikeToMakeStuff. Today we're going to make a really sturdy cart for my brand new lathe. I'm using this for my lathe, but really this could be easily adapted to hold just about any tool and give you some storage underneath it. The specific thing for the lathe here for me is adding some extra support on this side to carry the weight of this machine, and it's about 140 pounds. It's not light. Otherwise, it's really basic construction. You could probably build this entire thing with a circular saw or maybe even a jigsaw. All right, let's do it. I measured and laid out all the pieces on the 2x4s to have as little waste as possible. Then I just cut them all to length on the miter saw. I cut one piece of each size and used it as a template to cut the rest. That way all the legs were exactly the same height, all the width pieces were exactly the same width, etc. This stand is going to carry a fair amount of weight, so for the legs I'm going to use a lap joint. To do this, I raised the table saw blade up to the thickness of a 2x4 and then moved a stop block over the height of a 2x4. Using the crosscut sled, I put a leg up against the stop block and then moved it back and forth over the blade to chop away a whole section. This section fits the 2x4 perfectly. Once I had it cut away, I used a chisel just to clean up the edge. This fits perfectly with the mating 2x4 piece, so I did one of these cuts on both ends of each leg. The first thing to assemble were the side frames. These are really easy. I just pre-drilled and screwed these together. You'll notice that I didn't put any glue in these joints because it doesn't really need it, and if I ever want to change the height or the width of this cart, I can easily unscrew it and modify it. Once I had that, I made another one exactly like it, and then it was time to attach them. The other 2x4 pieces were the width of the table, and so I set them up against the top corner and drove in screws. To keep them in place, I drove some screws in from the other side, which is going into the end grain of the 2x4. In this case, it doesn't really matter, it's just there to stabilize it. I put the top section on and locked all these together with a whole lot of screws. Then it was time to cut a piece of MDF to go on the bottom. I just cut this down to match the size. I pre-drilled and drove in some screws to hold this in place as well. I also got some locking casters to add to the bottom of this so I can move this around the shop easily. These holes are a little bit big for screws, so I just backed those screws with some washers to make them fit. If you wanted this to be more general use, you could just cover the top with another solid piece, but instead I cut down a couple of pieces for the ends. I reinforced one end where the heavy part of the lathe goes with an extra piece of 2x4. Then I just put in a piece of MDF over it. I sized this piece to match one side of my lathe, the heavy side. If you have a different lathe, all you gotta do is change the dimensions of this piece. I added another piece on the opposite end, and then I had to fill in the middle. I wanted to try something with dust collection on this, so I traced the outline of the dust collection hose and then drilled it out. I used a big drill bit to make a couple of holes and then connected those holes with a jigsaw. I tried to stay inside the line so that it was a nice tight fit when I fit in the hose, and it worked pretty well. Overall, I had to go back with a file and clean it out a little bit just to make it fit better. I cut a couple of pieces of MDF to act as ramps. These are going to push the chips and the sawdust down to a central area so they can easily be cleaned up. Once I cut these to fit, I held them in at an angle just to make sure that they were right. Then I had to glue them in. I put some wood glue on the edges so that would hold them in long term. And to hold them while that glue dried, I used some CA glue and some activator. This makes the CA immediately catch and holds the piece in place. You could also screw these from the outside or just use some brad nails to hold them in instead. Then I just glued in a piece across the bottom. In the end, this whole center section probably really wasn't worth the effort, but I figured I'd leave it in just so you could see what I tried. To cover up the sides of this, I just used some 1/8" plywood that I had, cut down some strips, and then nailed them into the 2x4 frame. Next, it was time to make a big drawer to hold all of my lathe tools. This was made out of 1x pine, and I just cut the pieces down to length. 2 short sides, 1 back piece, and then a longer front piece. I lowered the blade on the table saw and then ran all of these pieces over it. This cuts a dado in each one of the pieces so I can slide in the bottom panel. I used some glue to attach the side panels to the back panel and then used some nails to hold them in place while the glue dried. After that, I slid in another piece of 1/8" plywood to use as the drawer bottom. I added some more glue and then put on the front piece. This front piece is longer than the rest of the drawer to hide the drawer slides. I just measured in from each edge to make sure it was even before adding the nails. By turning the cart on its side, it makes it a lot easier to put in the drawer slides. I used a piece of MDF as a spacer to hold it away from the top surface and then drove in some screws. Then I measured the distance from the end of the slide to the outside edge. I transferred that measurement to the drawer itself, and that told me where to put the end of the drawer slide on the drawer. I drew a line up as a center point and then held the slide in place. I marked where the screws should go and then pre-drilled and screwed in that slide. Did the same thing for the other side, and it locked right into place. Except for the 2x4s, all of the lumber here is stuff that's left over from previous projects, including what I'm using for the doors. In this case, it was 1/2-inch plywood that was painted on one side. This is not high-grade plywood, so it's not very good looking, but you could use whatever you wanted to here for the doors. I cut these down to fit, and in actuality, I cut them a little bit short. Regardless, they worked, so I put on some hinges on each side of the doors. I used a scrap piece of 1/8-inch plywood as a spacer and then set the door on it to screw it in. This gives it a little bit of space on the bottom so it doesn't rub against the 2x4 when it opens and closes. I did the same thing for the other side, making sure that the two doors were parallel, that way the gap in the middle was even from top to bottom. I ended up gluing a little piece on the inside of the door to stop them from moving in too far. I sanded the entire thing down and then just painted it all white. Then I just set the lathe in place. You could screw this to the table or put some blocks to hold it in place, but mine's heavy enough that it really doesn't walk around when it's in use. You could buy knobs, but I figured I needed the practice, so I decided to turn some on the lathe itself. I used a piece of walnut and made a couple of small knobs for the doors and one big one for the drawer. These are really easy to put in. I just found the center, drilled a hole from the backside, and drove a screw through the door into the knob. These are covered with a little bit of spray lacquer, by the way. And finally, I just loaded up all my tools. For me, furniture in the shop is just about utility. I don't really care what it looks like. And so having this as a combination of plywood and MDF and 2x4s really doesn't matter to me. But if you're more concerned about what it looks like, you could certainly wrap this entire thing in any one of those materials and it would look much more finished. This little dust collection area is really more about cleanup. It's not gonna gather all the dust as you're turning because stuff goes everywhere. This is really just an experiment to see if it would be easier to clean up all the chips, and it kinda was, kinda wasn't, not a big deal. I also made this cart to match my height, so when I'm turning, it's at the right height. But if you're taller, you're gonna need to extend this. Or if you wanna use this type of stand for a different tool altogether, you can just extend it in any direction. Since the structure is just 2x4s, it's really easy to scale. If you wanna make a cart like this on your own, I've got plans available for this on my website. They'll be linked down in the description and up in the card, so you can go check those out. Or if you're looking for a different type of lathe cart, my good buddy Izzy put out a video just a couple of days ago about making one that flips up and down. I'll link that down in the description as well. You should definitely go check it out. It's pretty awesome. I hope you liked this video and you found some useful stuff in it. Let me know down in the comments what you think. I've also got lots of different types of projects that you might be interested in, so be sure to check those out and don't forget to subscribe. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.